I just click this meeting is being live streamed. Oh my god.
Okay, but weird, I didn't get like the recording has started, but I guess that's okay.
Yeah, it's still saying here. Okay. Yeah, I think let me switch it to go. Yeah, I think we're
okay. We're live, yes?
Yeah, it's live now. We're live.
Yeah. So let's start our performance roundtables. There's only 2 of us today. And let's quickly go to the agenda to see what topics we have for today. The first topic is a new proposal on div lines. So the essence of the proposal is to improve performance for div lines rendering and the whole divs app. So the main problem with our virtual scrolling approach is that we are using pre-rendering to calculate the final height of the page. So what it does, it takes a div file by file, then it renders it like in an invisible state to get its height, and it populates the height for each div file. That way it can calculate the height over time, but the problem is that it's thread blocking. So for example, if you have 200 files, you'll have to calculate the height for all of these 200 files in order to get a proper scroll height. And it's the main problem with our page right now in terms of performance. So in order to solve that, we could, for example, disable line wrapping. So if we disable line wrapping, we can reliably calculate line height for each div file. And with that information, we can put that height into virtual scroller, and we won't be needing pre-rendering anymore. The problem is that line wrapping is quite hard to do. So I've mentioned in the agenda that Kai said we won't do this because recently we've tried to implement a simple solution to that, which is to just basically disable it and show scroll. And it didn't quite work because it has many issues, and I've linked in the proposal, I've linked a layout refactoring issue by Andrea, which basically lists all the problems with that. But I think we should reconsider that because it provides both performance improvements, and second of all, people are actually wanting this feature. There are people who would like to see us having a non-wrapping mode. So I think it's kind of worth to get back to this, not to cancel it for the time being. So that's the proposal, and it's still worth discussing, because even if you don't decide to stay with virtual scrolling, which we always consider like an intermediary step to a better solution for rendering. For example, if you go with server-side rendering, it's still beneficial because it also can get the same performance improvements from this, for example, with content visibility, which basically works very closely to what virtual scrolling does. So it's always beneficial no matter what solution we decide to use for our divs app. So that's the proposal.
I'm just wondering, like, how would it look like? Let's say if there's, it's just going to be a long line. So how
can I show you? Can I show you a screen to give a basic idea? Because I think JetBrains actually solved the issue quite nicely. let me see. Okay, so I have JetBrains IDE here. For example, let me find a bigger div. So right now I don't have line wrapping enabled. So you see the soft wrap, it actually wraps lines. I can disable it and see the whole line without wrapping. And notice when I start scrolling, it actually synchronizes scrolling for me. So it's synchronized in both directions. Like if I scroll horizontally or vertically, it's always on the same line. So we could work with something like that. And I don't think it's not like impossible for us to do, but it's of course not trivial to implement. And also the issue Andre created mentions that. So yeah, it's technically it's possible, but not that easy to do.
Yeah, the way it looks okay. I mean, because there's only one scroll bar, one horizontal scroll bar. So I was thinking, like, is it going to be like every line? I don't know.
No. No.
Yeah. Hi everyone. So the issue with that is that it's to support the multitude of possibilities, like to have the soft wrapped, to not have the soft wrap, to have the inline, to have the parallel, all of that in conjunction. And the UX difficulties we had was right now on that example that Stanislav showed, you were in a windowed example where we have a viewport sized scrollable area. In the web, how will we be doing those things? Like the scrolling would be outside of the window, could be below the viewport, because the size of the file diff could be bigger than the viewport. So, and those are the challenges that kind of like, it's really tricky to implement all the variations, all the, and cover all the UX pitfalls. This example, the Stanislav is really good of going around horizontal scrolling on the two sides of the parallel. It's definitely something we would consider. But for us to be able to implement that is kind of like a bit more tricky to get to that, because of the way that we have the layout today. I think that if we ever go into a system where we have a more viewport based, so for example, if we only had the file by file mode, or we were talking about a tabbed interface for the diffs based on an IDE, this would have been more trivial to jump to. Yeah, I'll cut it there. But Taz, have you talked about how the beneficial will be for the line height to be fixed? Sorry, I was a bit late.
Yeah, I've described that it basically solves the main problem with our diffs up rendering, which is like the current set speed pipeline gives that we have like 5 seconds of total blocking time. With this change enabled, and let's imagine we have no discussions on the div. It shouldn't be 5 seconds, it should be like 200 or 300 milliseconds. So the change is actually substantial to the performance. But yes, as you've mentioned, it's tricky to implement, but I think it's both tricky, but it's both possible. So that's the idea that I think we shouldn't table it like for the eternity of it, like saying, no, this is the thing we are never going to touch. I think we should play with it, like at least try and see how actually complex it is, like in some time.
So did you see the merge request that Phil had ready for this thing?
Yeah, I think I even commented on that one, but I think it didn't implement like the scrolling stuff or any of that.
No, not the scrolling. It implemented the not wrapping for inline, and then parallel. I think it had implementation, but it was really rough around the edges. Yeah, we're not saying no. We're just saying that for us to do that, we'll have to first repurpose the layout to be much more, robust and malleable. And it's about the trade-off of cost of implementation versus the benefit. And of course, I can understand the cost of that. We've been discussing this for a while, and it feels like virtual scrolling was always a patch, was always a band-aid. We definitely want to have a more meaningful solution where we can put stuff on the page without having the overhead of it being very slow because of the component buildup, the component reactivity overhead kind of thing. I'm just not sure we'll be able to prioritize that in the near future. It doesn't mean that we can't play around with it in a POC perspective. But I'm very doubtful that we will be able to, pick it up such a refactor for the layout of the diffs, unless, for example, we have, again, because remember, we always have to support the system where we don't have the wrapped lines, and it would be safe to assume that the majority of the users would use what we have today. What we've realized with some customers is that they're only willing to accept, or they actually prefer the non-wrapping for certain kind of languages that create really long lines, or I don't know. I think Python was one of them because of the indenting or something. But most other languages wouldn't be able to wouldn't prefer this. So it feels like it's such a task to build this again, I understand the performance benefit for sure. If we can determine the height, even if we use REMs for accountability for the accessibility perspective of users having a different line height, even if we did all that, we will still have to support the other, and that would still be the major part of the users using that. So it doesn't solve our problem for all users. So let's keep that in the perspective. But if we want to play around with it, I don't object, but I wouldn't dedicate a lot of time to something that we know will be marginal, not marginal in terms of the performance impact, but marginal in terms of the reach. And the 5x-file is a good example. Like, we built 5x-file to be an easy alternative for really large MRs to be reviewed. Not many people use it. So it's a preference. So yeah, but I don't have an action point right now. Do you feel like this is POC kind of thing? We build a POC for this, just to see the performance of improvement, or we use the Phil's branch to assess the performance improvements, or should we focus our attention into not needing virtual scrolling, or because all the other proposals that we have on the table, like the making the static lines not be rendered the way we're doing it right now, that to me feels a much more worthwhile pursuit in terms of like time. Anyway, keep it
I think
there.
it's more of a POC. So if we decide to even play with it, we need to evaluate performance benefits. So if we have the numbers on table, we can discuss even the possibility of implementing that stuff. But I'll quickly mention that I think there is no better solution to the problem with pre-rendering, because I don't see any other way of reliably knowing the height of the div to avoid rendering it in the background. So the closest best solution to that is just using div line height as a base height, and I'm thinking that it shouldn't wrap, like it won't wrap. But then if it wraps actually on the client side, it should update the height of the div, but that would cause scroll jank, so the scroll will be jumping all the time. So I don't have a better, an alternative solution that can reach everyone. Even if we disable virtual scrolling completely and decide to server-side render, we will still be met with the same problem, because we'll still have to render all this stuff on the client, which is problematic. And which is something I've already also encountered on the blame page, which has streaming support. So yeah, if we could at least find some solutions that has the best reach out of every solutions, that would be great. Yeah, but I don't see like a quick.
I remember those
quick one.
proposals. I remember those proposals you did. That proposal you did to, when you're following a link, prioritize the render of that file, put that in the top of the file, like those kinds of things to me, and then we just continue rendering as we go. And if we can find a way to remove the overhead of rendering each line or rendering each diff, if we can remove the overhead of all the listeners that view sets, and we just use a different way to put it on the page, I feel like we will have that reach. It will have that, because again, we've seen it's not just the layout effort that is causing the problems. It's the overhead of the JavaScript listeners. And it feels like we can put things on the page. It's just that everything everywhere all at once is ready to be reactive. But anyway, I don't think it's worth lingering too much on this point, but I'm okay in like dedicating some time to finding the timings of this, knowing that it's tricky to invest too much time implementing it right now. And say we came back with numbers that showed that view with a fixed line height, with the non-wrapping lines, will get a benefit of like 70% of speed. I would still have a hard time prioritizing that because not everybody would be in that view. And the complexity it would introduce for the layout would be counterproducing, even if you have 70% improvements for that particular view. So yeah, play around with it for more like closure perspective, but I wouldn't expect it to be scheduled very quickly.
I'll also quickly mention, I think there might be a correlation between merge request size and people wanting to use an unwrapped mode. I think there's a correlation between that because some languages force you to make bigger MRs, and usually these are the languages that have very long lines. So I think we could shoot 2 rabbits with one shot.
Okay, we haven't determined exactly what is the scenarios, but that's a fair assessment. Yeah, that could be. Thanks, Taz. I don't want to be difficult, but I really appreciate covering all the bases and trying all the experimentations we want. So thanks for that. Should we move on to the next point, Patrick?
Yeah, sure. For the next point, it's regarding the dispatch cache with max age feature flag. So changes are done the back end and front end. So we should be ready to roll it out. But I'm just wondering, like, what if we test it within our team? Like, maybe have a project and test some MRs, like commenting on whatever rebase and something else. See if there's a bug with still caching. I'm hoping there's none. Based on my testing, there's none. So, but just want to be sure. So I wonder if do you think if that's helpful, or we should just roll it out to GitLab projects then wait for feedback? Like the usual.
More than trying with real users, it would be interesting to see this on the site speed dashboards. So in that sense, if we only enable for user groups, that won't include the dashboards, right?
I just quickly checked the feature flag, so it's scoped on a per project basis. So I don't think we can scope it to the GitLab team. We can scope it to the GitLab project. At least
yeah, we'd have to change that.
Yeah, I'm thinking we can have like a single project, and then enable it for that project.
You mean before we enable for GitLab or GitLab?
Yeah.
I mean, Yeah, I don't oppose. Yeah, true. We should definitely cover all bases. We do, so just for reference, the project we're using for the dashboard, let me just pull this out here and share the screen. This is the merge request we're watching for the merge request large. Just take a look real quick. It's in the GitLab or GitLab project, right? So if we change the feature flag for that project, this dashboard or this test will display that, and we'll be able to see the impact that it has on these metrics. And then again, we'll have the recording, so we can watch the recording there of the difference. Now the question is, would it benefit this test? Because it's caching.
No,
You do have to run.
I think it's always fresh.
Is it? Yeah.
It's fresh on the second run.
Yeah, it's always fresh. It doesn't use caching at all, because otherwise you'll get skewed up results.
Yeah, it won't. Yeah, that's true. Well, yeah, so we won't be able to catch it, which is okay by me. It's I'd rather have an impact on users than on metrics, than on testing tools. But if anything, yeah, to find bugs. Yeah, as long as we enable it in the morning for us, where some of us will be around, to catch, like, if anything's wrong, we just turn it off immediately. I'll be finding, like, speeding up the rollout, going directly to the GitLab or GitLab project and watching it and potentially dropping a line on the what's happening in GitLab Slack channel. So in case somebody picks up issues, they come to us right away. But it's okay to enable for a specific project first, try it out, see how it works in production. It's sort of like a verification step of the feature before we enable for the whole thing. Yeah. We have one example, one project that we use for this sort of things, that you might want to use for this too. Let me just a second, I'll find the link for it. So that Jacques has created. How do I do this? Waterfall. There. Okay. I'm going to put it on the agenda. In case you want to use that, it'll be fine. That's one we use for testing highlight.js on the source code side of things. If you're going to use that right away. I don't know if we have any merge requests now that I mentioned that. So yeah, sorry, I'm rambling. Feel free to enable for one project and then enable go rollout. Stas, you have a point here.
Yeah, I'll suggest two more projects, which is GitLab SVGs and GitLab UI. GitLab SVGs is, I think, is the smallest one of SAM. It could be a good starting point, and GitLab UI is quite bigger, but it's not as big as GitLab itself. So this should be good to go. If any issues arise, I think we should be quick to notice them.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think it's going to be less disruptive too, because usually we just enable it on gitlab.org/gitlab and www.gitlab.com. Then sometimes it affects the workflow of people. So yeah, I guess we can use. I think we can use those projects, so we have a wider base, and then yeah, just wait for feedback.
I'm saying that Stas links are better, so definitely use those. So we don't have this schedule right now for this milestone, but would you have capacity to start rolling it out this milestone, Patrick?
Probably next week, because
okay. Thursday.
I'm still working on other deliverables. So right. It's going to be disruptive for me if it's like something went wrong.
Right. No, 100%. And if something goes wrong, the ID just turn off the feature flag, and then we can schedule the fix for the next milestone or something. But it is important to start rolling it out so that we can like get some lessons from it. I don't expect us to be able to turn it on by default in this milestone because we need a bit of time to assess this properly before we go to customers. But yeah, next week we can start. If you need any help watching over things after your shift ends in the day, feel free to include Phil on that rollout because he built the front end part, I think.
Yep. Awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah. The next point's just an FYI. So we had Redis cache for discussion before, and then we replaced it with HTTP caching. But so it's still behind the feature flag, but it's enabled in production. So it's disabled. The Redis cache is disabled. We're using HTTP caching. So there's no real effect. There's no difference. But on the GPT test, there's a difference because of how the test behaves. So there's a discussion in that link that I posted in the agenda that for encache results, for discussions endpoint, it's spending around like 2.5 seconds. So yeah, so that's going to be an S2 performance issue, which is it's going to be a backend issue. So we need to look into it. So if we can improve it further. So far, we look into paginating it, so it helped a bit, but yeah, still slow. So there's maybe something in there that needs to be fixing because I think 2.5 seconds is a long time for like a paginated result.
Paginating what exactly?
The discussions. Yeah.
Do we have to disable Redis caching for a specific reason there?
We disabled the Redis caching because it's causing too much storage on production, and it's not really being used. The utilization is like it's really low. I can't remember the exact figure, but right now, based on I have a visualization of like cache results versus uncached results. It's like only 20% of the requests are being cached. So most of the time, like users are viewing the discussion fresh. So
is it created on a view premise? So it's not created before you visit the page?
what do you mean? The HTTP cache?
No, the Redis one. Do we create it in the background before we visit the page, or is it created after we visit the page and view the discussions?
Yeah, it's created after the first visit. So succeeding visits get cached.
Yeah, so
this is relevant. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, this must be the reason why it's having low utilization, because like I can see how like a person adds comments to the merge request and then and after wants to reply, but in order to reply he has to see the page and it's not cached for him for his first visit. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's kind of related to like if we want to look at recaching it in Redis again, it's kind of related with the other initiative about pre-caching, pre-generated cache for the highlighted lines.
But this is an important lesson. It's definitely clear that whatever we use to persist those, it wouldn't be on Redis. Like to pre-calculate those things. And it's fair. Like we know it's a really large pool of data that we would need to pre-calculate things for. I'm wondering, yeah. So I'm just making sure that I understand this. So we're turning off the cache on Redis, but we don't have the caching effort we're doing is on the batch diffs, the ones above with the max age. We don't have that for the discussions. Would that apply? Should we work on that? And even then, if we do, it won't fix the problem of the metrics. So we still have the report, the severity too. So when you say replace it with HTTP caching, are we replacing it with HTTP caching?
Oh, it's already replaced. That's a past tense. It's already replaced.
Oh,
so yeah, but it's behind a feature flag that's enabled in production, but it's not enabled for self-managed instances.
Okay. When you say HTTP caching, it's just the basic.
It's using ETAG, so there's still verification being done on the backend side. So yeah.
This is one more example where the testing tools for performance are not warmed up caches, so they always get the scenario that the user has never visited the page, which is fair, but we won't have the impact of repeating visits accounted for. I'm not sure we should, but just a note.
In that MR, it's like actually requested for the test to be updated. It's like, so they're cache results, but I think they're going to update it as well to behave the same like productions, like only 20% are cache instead of like all of the requests.
Yeah, I would be okay in having a separate, so whenever we track the metrics of this sort of thing, I would be okay in having a secondary result that would show like cold cache, warm cache. Yeah, because it's important to understand the two scenarios. Because like you said, not every visit to the page is warm. So it's warm cache. So thanks for the heads up. Is there an action point here that we should try to schedule or try to counter this in any way?
Well, I'm just waiting for the issue to be filed. So if it's filed, then we can get it scheduled.
Yeah. Okay, Stas, you're to voice it.
Yeah, I think discussions having slow response times may create a UX issue for us because we don't show any kind of feedback for the user that the discussions are loading in the background. So it's not possible to tell if we see the file that has discussions or not. So maybe it's worth reconsidering adding cache back or solving it in any other way, like showing some kind of loading progress that we are actually loading discussions, because it may be really confusing that you scroll past the diff files and the discussion starts to pop in, and you might actually miss the first discussions because they haven't been loaded yet. So yeah, I think we should work on that.
Yeah. I mean, we have the loading state on the change on the overview page. Yeah, but but we should have it on the diffs as well. But I don't know, how would that look like? It's it's already like the diffs are already there. Like, there's a lot of info. But,
right, and even if we paginate, there's that problem that we won't be able to do we already have the discussions paginated loading? I can't remember if we ever
we're already paginating it. Yeah.
Okay. So we can't do the assumption that the last comment being loaded on the last page is the last being shown, because it could be the first one on the first line on the first file. And if you're navigating the changes, then it becomes. There's one, again, I might be the only one hammering on this, but there's one scenario that I think we could. So if you go into the changes tab and you have file by file mode enabled, we could have an endpoint to load the discussions for a single file only. We don't have that at the moment, I think. We just load per page. But then we go back to that thing that would only benefit those users, and we're not even testing that scenario, the file by file mode. But yeah, thanks for the heads up. I'm not sure we have anything that we can react in time to cover that, but
I'll just add a little last point that I think having floating discussions that are not affecting the height of the div might help with that, because if we fetch just the lines that have discussions, which should be, I think, faster than fetching the whole discussion content. If we have just this information, which files and which lines have discussions, we could show some kind of indication that this line has something to discuss, has some comments, and load the actual discussions after interaction or whatever we decide. So that can be one way to solve it.
Yeah. Do we have an issue for that discussion, like removing discussions from the inline of the diffs? I feel like that's UX.
I feel like we've been discussing this for quite some time, but I don't know if we have an issue. I'll create one so we can.
I haven't followed the latest on the restructuring MR proposal. I remember seeing something like that the discussions would be outside of the diffs. But that would be interesting to see.
From what I saw from the experimentations, like with merge request restructuring, I'm not sure if the discussions are actually going to be detached completely, because we still have changes tabs there. I'm not sure about that. So yeah, I'll create an issue about floating discussions so we can point to it.
Yeah, thanks. Anything else, Patrick? No. Okay, so I wanted to call out. Oh, wait, let me just try to find the numbers that we talked about yesterday. We do have progress on the OKR to lower the LCP and the TBT on the changes tab. We're at 27%. Let me just try to find the actual thing. There it is. So currently the changes, I think this might be related to your changes. Wait, it's loading. Okay. So I think this impact might be related to the changes you rolled out, Stas. I'm not sure. So we had some reduction on both the LCP and the TBT, although we would like to have more, right? So my question is more or less like, what are the ideas that we have? Sorry, this is the wrong agenda. What are the ideas that we have that could potentially address or could potentially benefit these metrics and improve our performance on that page? Is there anything in the line that we haven't prioritized we should look at? Does anybody have any ideas?
I think server-side rendering experimentation is a primary one, because it changes, like it completely changes how we render divs. I think this should be the most impactful one, and the one I've just presented with the first point for fixed line height. But as we described, it's not close to being worked on. So right now I only see divs file SSR, and past that I think we've already implemented quite a lot during this like 3 months, because we went from like 15-20 seconds of TBT to just 5. So I think we get some really good progress already.
Rock on. Yeah, we'll take a look at that. Does that, just try to see, so the investigation, it's currently scheduled, right? So we are looking into it. What you're saying is like the actual implementation of that idea. Are we ready to start implementing that? I'm guessing that there's still some unknowns.
I think we'll start with a POC, which has limited functions. I think it will have only file tree divs, and with divs we'll have only discussions to see how we can match, how we can combine server-side written content with interactive content, and we'll evaluate the performance, see if it actually solves the problem, If it does, we can proceed with the proper implementation. The good thing is that we already have a good foundation with streaming. So streaming code is already ready for us. So we can reuse that. And we just need to make a server-side rendered version of the TIFFs and start playing with this.
Okay, I'm interested in seeing the plan. We might want to have a conversation around that particular topic. So it will require backend capacity, or is it just a templating thing? We need a backend.
I'm not sure about the backend kind of stuff, but if I think I won't have like really big requirements from backend, just some minor questions like how do I get this data to templates, and that's it.
Okay, but we would probably need someone to help you there. So the question I have with the server-side effort for us to pick up is, would this effort include loading things on the page? So inherently, this loads data onto the page that is not loaded by the Vue app, right? It's the server side giving us that rendered version. Whether it's sync or an async call, I don't really care too much. But are we already prepared to have something static come on the page and we don't make that reactive? Are we ready for that? And then in the middle, we want to inject something that will be reactive. Do we already know how to do that with the Vue stack that we have right now?
I think it's not that complex to implement. We don't have like the infrastructure ready for it in our front-end code, but it's trivial to implement. We do this stuff with images lazy loading. That's one approach to it. So using a combination of mutation observer and intersection observer. That's one way to do it. But the other way is to use web components, which basically do the same stuff, but without these manipulations. So we have a couple of options how we can do this. Yeah, but it should be written from scratch, I think.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing exactly. Would each one of the areas be their own Vue apps, or is it one Vue app? It just has a bunch of stuff in there that it wasn't rendered by the Vue. I'm a bit lost there.
It depends how we implement it, but I think going with multiple Vue apps would be the best. In terms of performance, of course.
Have one orchestrator somewhere.
Yes. Having one code that is responsible for example, clicks, for rendering stuff when it enters viewport, and all kinds of stuff.
Okay, it'd be interesting to see the plan. So if we can wrap up this milestone with a plan or a note on that issue, that is a spike. So we will create another issue, which won't be investigation. You'll be implementing server-side rendering for diffs. I'll have another issue created, and then we can schedule that and the follow-up of the spike. But yeah, let's discuss the plan of this early on so that we're all on board, and we can identify some roadblocks early on, even before the kickoff. So we want to have a kickoff session, but before even that, we should definitely talk about this plan. It feels like you should also be involved, Stas. So I want to make sure that you have time for the Vue 3 work migration and also be involved in this. So we'll talk about capacity and stuff about this, I think, for 1511. Thanks.
Sure.
That answers my question. What should we look into 1511 for sure? And even again, the goal is to advance. I'm okay if the effort takes more than one milestone to deliver. So we just need to get started in that direction, and hopefully we can deliver it early on in 16.0 or something. That would be a really nice gift for the major release, to have a good performance boost. All right, thanks. Anything else we want to discuss for this or for any other point?
I saw you've posted a new idea by Thomas, which is to generalize merge request items. But since Thomas is not here, I don't think we can benefit from this discussion without him, because I'm quite lost on the proposal actually. Maybe
Okay.
I'm missing something.
So this came up. This came up on the last call we had. So maybe it would be interesting to watch the recording. The idea came from, we were having a discussion about the performance and how should we repurpose things and everything. And it came to be that we've had discussions in the past about people being allowed to comment on commit messages or file names or diff lines, and all of that being at the same level of commenting. Like I comment on an object, I comment on something, right? Right now, all you can comment on is lines, right? And this came up from the perspective of performance, but it quickly evolves to a feature area that it will be like products, new feature, new way of doing things. I think it came up with us chatting, matching an entire blob of a diff, and matching that with a comment. How could we make that matching up? If we don't use the line hash, right? If you use something else. Something that we could potentially guess on the front end what the ID for each line is. So yeah, it started with that conversation and it evolved into, right, well, what if we could identify anything on the merge request, just that lines happen to be one of those objects. So that's where the proposal comes from. And again, looking at the competition, some competition of code review tools do allow you to comment on different things. One of the things I've seen is some tools allow you to comment on the code structure. Say you want to comment on an if clause, or you want to comment on a for loop. You'll be commenting on that for loop. And if the file changes, the comment would survive the changes because it's attached to the for loop. That's just an example, right? They go much deeper on the analysis of that. But what Thomas's proposal, and he kind of captured the discussion we had on the call in that issue. Pretty lengthy, but it's pretty interesting if we look at the possibilities that it opens, because we can start re-implementing, if we ever do re-implementation on a whole approach. We will start with re-implementing the lines as being one of the categories, but we could extend that in the future for whatever we want, going deeper in the file or line comment, commit messages, all that stuff could become later if we have a generalized approach. And this reminds me of the work that Plan has done with the work items, where you have one generic concept of a work item, and then it can be implemented and materialized into far less abstract concepts like incidents or objectives or key results. Kind of like reminds me some of that work. But yeah, I think that's more of a long-term discussion than a short-term. It's more like, is this something we even want? And if we do, whenever we pick up deep refactors of the code, we should keep that in mind. I've asked it yesterday on the weekly call for product and UX take a look, essentially to kind of like give us your thoughts, but also us front end and back end, we might have some thoughts in terms of implementation. But the idea is this even worth considering if we do a refactor, or is it too much of an ask at this point? Yeah, that's kind of like the context, how that came about.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that. I think I was most confused by the side which is responsible for that stuff. So is it restructuring on the backend side? Is it restructuring on the front end side? Is it both? Can we do one without the other? So I was mostly interested in that.
No, that's a really good question. It would be both, I expect. I mean, from the moment that we know where to attach the comments, the front end knows what to do, right? The comment structure shouldn't change, whether it's a line or a commit message or a file name. It doesn't really need to change the structure of the comment. It might change the way that it shows it. I know in the past, I think it was Pedro that suggested that commit messages should be displayed in the file tree as like a separate entity. Like at the top of the file tree, you would have like, commit messages. And then when you click on that, you would display a different kind of content instead of a diff file. It would be sort of like a list of commits of that merge request that you could comment on. Like we've talked about some of those concepts before. So you'll be backend and front end changing. Sure. You'll be changing the way that we attach things to things. And I'm being generic on purpose. But yeah, it would be backend and front end effort, which really only makes sense if we're considering a refactor on the way that we attach things to lines. I think that's when this will come relevant. But yeah, it's not a short-term thinking kind of thing. We also have another one that we haven't addressed today. I'll just briefly mention it here on the end of the agenda. I forgot to add this. So thanks for adding. Oh, Stas, you're the perfect assistant. Thank you so much. Consider performing diff highlighting on the front end instead of back end. We don't need to go deep there today, but it's something that keeps coming back. Mostly because theoretically it can be done. And we have likely some great results for some kinds of files and some kinds of changes. But my take in the lessons we were taking on the source code side of using highlight.js explicitly, it's not very good. But it could be that it's the highlight.js flaw. So one of the things that is really interesting that we had a discussion last week was, what if we used WebAssembly to port a C library to do syntax highlighting on the front end, but using WebAssembly instead? Yeah, using a Ruby gem on the browser. Like, so that's some of the crazy ideas that we've been discussing there. And I'm definitely willing to hear, because just because highlight.js doesn't give us a lot of support doesn't mean that there isn't something out there that does. My biggest question there is, theoretically, to do a proper syntax highlighting, you need the whole file. That's how we do it on the front. On the back end, we got the whole file, we highlight it, and then we take the snippets we need, right? To do that on the front end, if you change 2 lines on a 10 megabyte file, we would need to download the 10 megabyte file to the browser. That's, to me, the biggest hurdle. So yeah, Stanislav, I'm keen to hearing your thoughts here.
Yeah, I'm interested in knowing, do we really need to move highlighting to front end? Because from our last discussions, I think Kerry mentioned that it's actually like a solved problem on the backend side. So if we can keep it on the backend without performance issues, I think we should, the best is to keep it there, because it's not sending any bytes for the front end to launch the JS application. And also it doesn't have all the issues with partial highlighting when we start from the middle of the file.
Yeah, I'm with Gary on this one. But we opened the issue in case we want to like do some investigations on it. Again, to me, that particular problem of the whole file, it's not even an architecture of our app. It's the architecture of our medium that kind of prevents this from happening. Unless we start talking about, the merge request using your local file system as the source of the project. Unless we have that, I don't think we'll ever be able to do that. And again, it's trying to solve a problem that it's better solved on the backend anyway. From the perspective, yes, the payload is smaller. We've seen this in source code. The emoji file, the emoji JSON, it was sort of like a couple kilobytes. And then annotated, the highlighted version HTML was like 3 megabytes. Yes, it's larger, but it's still smaller than downloading the whole file. Well, not in this example, actually. So that would be 500 kilobytes. But it's definitely smaller to download the raw file. It's just that to do the proper thing, we would have to account for really large files being downloaded and only needing a very small portion. So architecture-wise, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm with Gary on this. I think this is better invested time if we find a way to pre-calculate things on the back end, keep them stored somewhere that don't affect Redis, like a lot of that will have a higher impact on our app than anything else that we do on the front end. Which again, if you look at the competition, it's like download the things that are static, ready to be put on the page, and then we deal with interaction when the user interacts with it. And that's a far more interesting approach than doing more and more and more things on the front end that we're trying to keep performance. So I don't know. I just rate it because it's open. But I'm with Gary. I think it's a solved problem.
Yeah, I have the same thoughts. Like, do we actually have that issue now open for recalculating?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So Patrick asks, do we have that issue for recalculating? I've asked, let me try to find, I've asked Carrie to create one, but we've had one in the past. Yes, all right, we have this issue. Maybe this is the one we can use. Talk about these sort of things. Pre-generate merge request cache data. It's so I'm not sure if this is exactly the one, but it could be a starting point. So yeah. There's a bunch of things in here, which is one thing is the metadata and the descriptions and all that stuff that we need to render the MR. It could be created upon an edit or upon a creation or an edit on the merge request. And then the file changes, we really only need, well, we need to generate those every time there's a push. However, if we're comparing with the head of the target branch, we need to update that cache every time the target moves, which would make a lot of work happen a lot of the time in our case of our repository, right? And so for fast moving repositories, it's really hard to keep that cache updated, right? Because the diff is constantly changing. That could be a hurdle, but anyway, that's the issue.
Yeah, I think it's still doable because we store the head diff in the database. So every time target changes, we try to reload the diff and store it in the database. So probably at the same time, we can pre-cache. We can pre-calculate those cache.
But wouldn't it become stale very quickly?
It can. But it's like, do we actually change like the target branch every minute? I'm not sure. So
yeah, definitely worth for some projects. Some other projects will probably not be as easy to handle. What I'm thinking is every time the master branch or a main branch of a project moves, gets new commits, if we had to go to every MR targeting that branch and update it, that's quite a workload to do. So there's definitely something in there that we need to consider. But yeah, feel free to discuss it in the issue and ask those questions and move it forward, because that's really an interesting proposal, which that would get us like the benefit of a warm cache upon a first visit, which is really nice goal to have.
Yep.
All right, we're at time, people. Thank you so much for the discussions. I don't know who started the live stream, but I think I'll be able to catch it anyway and change the visibility of it, so I'll publish it. Thanks for streaming it and starting it, and thanks for a wonderful discussion. Great to see you, Patrick. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Hope you're well.
Yeah, I'm better.
Right.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right, take care.